Welcome to another Fresh Perspectives episode. I'm here today with Zach Doberman, who is an LMSW practicing in the tri-state area and has a particular interest in working with grief and with couples counseling. Thanks so much for making some time to do this with me.
Thanks so much for having me.
So jumping right into our prompt and the topic of these episodes, which is what is something that in your perspective that you're seeing from entering this field that you see as an issue, something that we could really use some we could really use some improvement on within our community or within our larger world, society at large.
You know, I think that when it comes to society, and that includes Jewish society, that includes American society, everything that's going around, I really feel that there's an increase in anxiety and depression nowadays that I think most people agree with. I mean, I've heard some critics of that nuanced, type of thought process before, but from my perspective, I think it's really been, you could say, especially the last few years, but in general, like there's just been a tremendous amount of seemingly increase in anxiety, depression, these types of things. And I was wondering, like, people seem to try to give very big answers to answer these questions that, in my mind, seem pretty simplistic. Like when it comes to, I've heard, oh, social media, something like that. Oh, that's just, that's the answer, And it's like, but how come the Hasidic kids that I'm seeing are, having anxiety, depression more than, previously? Like it just didn't seem to fit, all the ideas. So in my mind, I thought, okay, maybe there's something more fundamental going on here, a little bit more nuanced, and maybe this could be something that we could all work on or notice or something like this, and it could hopefully make us overcome any challenges we have, whether that's our children or ourselves. Hopefully this can be a springboard for us. Yeah, that's the thought.
Yeah, so I'm curious to hear what some of those things are. I think it's a good point about how some of the go-to answers don't necessarily match the facts. So curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, so I like to give this story as my like prelude into the answer. So I last year, so a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, whatever it was, I was learning in a base medrash with my chavrusa in a modern Orthodox high school in Teaneck somewhere, and I had a conversation with like an 11th grader who was there. I'm like, oh, why is there so much anxiety and depression nowadays? And he said to me, he's like, because the challenges that we face nowadays and the pressures are so much more than have been in previous generations. And I essentially scoffed at him, but I didn't say it to his face, but I was thinking it internally. I was just thinking of, like, my grandfather was born in 1923 in Lithuania. He, was someone who, before, he didn't even go through the Holocaust, quote unquote, but he came to America at the age of 13 in 1936. He didn't know the language. He had lost two of his siblings to tuberculosis by the time he made it to America. He didn't have any money in the family. And then 3, 4 years later, World War II breaks out, and he's now enlisting in the American Army. Again, barely knows the language. And through all of this, goes to war, comes back, raises a family, lost a son even, very early, unfortunately. And through his entire life, I didn't see once any anxiety, any depression, anything. And so how could you tell me that this 15, 17-year-old kid who's like might not get into YU honors, like that kid has more challenges than my grandpa? It just didn't seem to make any sense. So I was thinking that maybe that is inherently the point, that the challenges that we face as we become adults, as we go through childhood, as we go through life, they essentially build up our distress tolerance, shall we say, our ability to handle the challenges of life. So if our lives are more comfortable now, I think we can fairly say that they're more comfortable now in physicality than they have ever been previously. The way we're living is essentially the way Shlomo Melech lived, right? We have food whenever we want. We have the comfiest couch imaginable. We have, if anyone has to wait more than 2 days to get something, it's like crazy, like all these types of things, like they breed a certain level of comfort in us that doesn't allow for us to deal and with any type of distress. And so when we then, grow up And then we face the ultimate challenges of life that come, whether that's someone getting sick, passing away, which are inevitable, the challenges of shidduchim, the challenges of infertility, any challenge that someone is dealing with, finances, like these things essentially are crippling. It's like if you're trying to lift a 50-pound weight and you've only been lifting 5-pound weights your entire life, but if you've been lifting 25, 30, 40 pounds, it's like, okay, so then 50 pounds isn't that big a deal. So I think that it's possible we could say, if anyone has any other ideas, I'd love to hear, feel free to email me, anybody. But I just feel like this is like a fundamental idea that we haven't built up our tolerance level, our ability to handle discomfort,
Yeah, so in a sense, a diminished capacity for distress, a lower level of distress tolerance, inability to manage through those things. So I'm just curious, do you have thoughts on, we don't have time to go into this whole topic fully, but any quick thoughts on how we can develop more of a capacity for that?
It's a really good question. And yeah, I think this is, if this wasn't tachlis, what's the point, right? I think that on a small scale, the small scale distresses are the ways that we're possibly saying, right? So, keep the medical care, keep that stuff that keeping us alive, that makes life so much easier. But when it comes to some of the smaller distresses in life, maybe we should try to hone in on that. So as an example, maybe we should stop taking the elevator as much and walk upstairs or downstairs, right? Small level of distress, something like that. How about another thing that I think is really important is if you've ever gone on a bus or we're in an elevator with someone who, even though we just said not to go in elevators, if you do go in an elevator, if you ever been there and there's someone who you don't know or you know them barely, it's like, it used to be 30 years ago, you were going to just make an awkward conversation with that person. Maybe you'd strike up a relationship in 5 seconds. Maybe you make a nice comment, distill the tension, these types of things. No one does that anymore, right? You just go to your third leg, your phone, you take yourself totally out of the situation. And because of that, again, it's just supporting, reiterating these types of ideas that we're reinforcing. That's the word, right? Reinforcing these ideas that we can handle distress. And so if we go out of our way to, not saying we need to get rid of our phones entirely, but at least, if we're in a situation where we feel uncomfortable and we feel we're going to our phone to take us out of it, maybe intentionally go into that and be like, hey, what's your name? Never met you before. Or, oh man, I can't believe it's so hot outside. Or, just engage with people, which has a double effect of both handling distress in a positive way, but also improving our ability to actually communicate with others, which again creates so much better feelings in us and these types of things. I feel like these types of small distresses are really vital.
Yeah. So I'm just curious, would you go so far as to say that it would be beneficial or smart to, let's say I'm ordering something online, you gave the example before of like, if anything takes more than 2 days to come, it's like, you could lose your mind. Would you say like choose 7-day shipping, even if it's the same price as 2-day shipping, like intentionally? I mean, obviously, if you need something urgently, you need something urgently. But like, is there a value in like intentionally kind of forcing yourself to have to wait longer?
I think if the premise is correct, which I think it is, and again, if people disagree with it, feel free, Zachary.Doberman@gmail.com. Feel free to email anything you got. But, if that premise is correct, then building up that resilience, that tolerance of things that you're uncomfortable with, assuming that it's not going to actually cause you gigantic pain down the line. If you want the Cheerios for breakfast, maybe go for the Life instead, or vice versa. Go intentionally build up that tolerance within yourself to be like, okay, these things are equally fine. They're not going to kill me. Okay, why not? What doesn't kill you make you stronger, as a once, incredibly wise person once said, right? Yeah. So I personally think that it would really go a long way if we all kind of internalize that thought process.
Really interesting. Okay, so shifting over to the second part of the conversation, something that you see us as a community or a society doing well, and how we can try and continue strengthening it.
It's really interesting as someone who I work in Monsey, in a clinic in Monsey, a religious clinic, and we get a lot of Hasidim here. And I think that that's something which in and of itself, I think needs to, be tremendous praise, that a community which I think a lot of us, especially from like a modern Orthodox background, we view Hasidim as closed-minded and that, and we have our preconceptions, when the truth is that no, like they've again, this is probably more of a recent thing, but they're more open to these things than we realize. And I think that the religious community, modern Orthodox, Hasidic, Yeshivish, everyone has really become much more open to the idea of treating their mental health better and focusing on getting whatever services are necessary, and combine that with the tremendous type of, let's talk about these podcasts or whatever it is, we have the resources totally available to us, I think is really fundamentally, important, and something that, thank God, we've really tapped into in a way. And maybe we can even increase that, work on with the kids. Yakov Danishevsky has a podcast. Check it out. That's the type of thing, maybe we should start doing. But yeah.
That's great. I love that answer. I actually, just before we finish up, I want to loop back to the first part of the conversation. So certainly the quantitatively, the halves are not going to be equal here. But I'm just wondering, we have such an emphasis these days in the concepts of self-care, let's say, for example, right? Which I think is a complicated subject. I don't think it's as simple as people make it out to be. And I think that based on what you've said, I'm actually wondering if there's another wrinkle of complication that I never really thought about before, which is what you're saying is that actually we would do well to do certain things that might, at least on the surface, look like the opposite of self-care. We would do well to actually introduce more, I don't know, call it self-distress. But it's a tricky topic because what that would mean, because we're not looking for like self-punishment, right? But an example you gave before is like, I want a certain cereal and I'm specifically going to choose my second choice and not my first choice. So it's an interesting thing because like, we're not looking to punish ourselves, but in some way it's like, in some way the messaging there is counter to a lot of the messaging that's going on in the mental health, from the mental health world.
I'm not averse to being against the mental health world. We could say that, but
Yeah, sure.
But I think you're making a very, very good point that that there, when it comes to, we talked about how grief, whatever, that's something that I'm very interested in. There is a really fine line in life between what we would, I guess, classify as trauma and experiencing negative emotion, and I think that those two have kind of been, a little bit distorted, and like, these types of things where it's like, I can't experience any difficult emotions. If I do, it's called trauma. Like, that's, I think, is an overstatement, because essentially the way in my mind, I think of it, trauma is something which essentially really breaks you. I mean, like I don't mean irrevocably, like you can never come back from it, but it breaks like the foundation. Like, it really hurts it a lot. And then to build it back up takes like 5 times as much effort. When it comes to like just difficulties in life, it's like, no, those are inherently the thing that if you sit with those negative emotions, a little bit of mindfulness, a little bit of time just spending on your emotions, which like Shiva is, right? To sit there and just sit in your emotions and sit in the grief, you eventually come out of that with a much different perspective on the Chama, a change of perspective, shall we say. And again, a much longer topic, but I really think that people should be attuned to this nuance in life, that sometimes the negative things that happen to us can actually be real positives for our growth, not even just in I can overcome them, but the overcoming itself or the experiencing themselves really builds a person's distress tolerance, shall we say.
Yeah, lots to think about. Thank you so much.
For sure.